AITA for not wanting to put my girlfriend on deed of house I'm purchasing. I never imagined that buying a house, something I had been looking forward to for years, would turn into such a stressful and emotionally draining situation. But here I am, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this is all a sign that I am making a mistake. Not with the house itself, but with the entire situation that has unfolded since I started this journey. I am 29 years old, and after years of saving, working, and living relatively modestly, I finally started looking at houses to buy. My parents, who recently sold the home I grew up in, have been heavily involved in the process, both emotionally and financially. They downsized after realizing they did not need such a big place anymore, and since they had the means to do so, they generously decided to contribute a substantial amount toward my down payment. Their reasoning was simple: they wanted me to have a good start in life, to have financial security, and to get a home I could truly call my own without feeling like I was stretching myself too thin. They knew that I had been wanting this for a long time, and their help was something I deeply appreciated. For the past few years, I have been living with my girlfriend, who is 28. We have been together for 3.5 years and have lived together for more than 2 of those. It has not been a perfect relationship, far from it, but I love her, and I do see a future with her. That being said, we have had some persistent issues, and to be honest, many of them are financial. She has struggled to keep a job, and even though I have never been the kind of person who thinks a relationship should be purely transactional, it has been frustrating to carry the financial burden for the majority of our time living together. Out of the 30 months we have lived in our current apartment, she has only worked for about 8 of those. When she was working, she did contribute to bills, but when she was not, everything fell on me. The biggest issue, though, is spending. She has a habit of making purchases that she does not necessarily need, mostly from Amazon, and running up credit card bills she struggles to pay off. I have tried to talk to her about it many times, but it never really gets resolved. She tells me she is going to work on it, and then a few weeks later, another package shows up at the door, or another bill comes in, and we are right back where we started. It is something that has made me hesitant about fully committing to marriage, not because I do not love her, but because I know that money is the #1 cause of divorce, even above infidelity. And I do not want to walk blindly into something that could become a serious issue down the road. When I started looking at houses, I was excited. It felt like a major step forward in my life, and since my girlfriend and I live together, I naturally assumed she would be moving in with me. There was never any question about that. In my mind, it would be our home in the sense that we would build a life there together, even if I was the one paying for it. The idea of putting her name on the deed never even crossed my mind, not because I wanted to exclude her, but because from a logical standpoint, it just did not make sense. I was the one buying the house. The money was coming from me and my parents. She was not contributing financially to the purchase, and given her history with money, I did not think it would be a responsible decision to put her name on something this significant. At first, everything was great. We went to showings together, talked about decorating, and made plans for how we would use the space. It felt like we were on the same page, and I was genuinely happy about what was happening. But then she told her parents. And that is when everything changed. I do not know exactly how the conversation went, but I know that when she came back to me after speaking with them, her entire attitude had shifted. She told me, "My parents think I should be on the deed," and then, as if that was not enough to completely take me off guard, she followed it up by saying, "I need a safety net." That phrase has been stuck in my head ever since. I was completely thrown. A safety net? It felt like she was already preparing for the relationship to fail. It made me wonder if she had been thinking about that possibility all along. Before this conversation, I thought we were in a place where we were working toward a future together, and now, all of a sudden, she was talking about making sure she had an exit plan. It made me feel like I was being set up to lose. My dad is absolutely against it. He was not thrilled about her financial habits to begin with, but he never said much because he wanted to respect my relationship. However, once this conversation came up, he did not hold back. He told me, "Listen, I like her, but this house is your investment, and I don't want to see you split it 50-50 with someone who hasn't put anything into it." He said that this was not something her parents should even be involved in, that this was between me, him, and my mom, since they were the ones contributing the money. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. The house, the down payment, the mortgage, it is all on me. If we broke up, there would be nothing tying her to it financially, but if her name was on the deed, she would still be entitled to half of something she did not pay for. That is not fair. That is not how this should work. I am not opposed to sharing things in a relationship, but this is a massive financial commitment, and I do not think it is unreasonable to want to protect it. What frustrates me the most is that before her parents got involved, there was never even a discussion about this. She was excited to move in with me, and now, suddenly, it is a problem if her name is not on the deed. It makes me feel like her parents put this idea in her head, and now she will not see it any other way. Since this conversation, I have felt anxious about the entire thing. What was supposed to be an exciting milestone now just feels stressful. I have even started wondering if I should hold off on buying a house altogether, not because I do not want to, but because I do not want to bring this kind of tension into something that should be a positive experience. I love my girlfriend. I really do. But I also cannot ignore the fact that we still have financial issues that we have not fully worked through. If those issues were not there, maybe this conversation would have gone differently. Maybe I would not have had such a strong reaction to her asking to be on the deed. But given everything we have been through with money, I cannot shake the feeling that this is not just about a safety net, it is about securing something that she has not contributed to, just in case things go south. So now I am stuck in this strange limbo, torn between my excitement for the future and my gut telling me that something about this is off. And I keep asking myself, am I the asshole for wanting to keep my name as the only one on the deed? Or am I just protecting myself from a situation that could end up hurting me in the long run? Update 1. I didn't think things could get any worse. I really didn't. I thought the tension between my girlfriend and me over the house situation was the peak of the stress, that we had hit the limit of this argument, and it would either fizzle out or turn into one of those lingering disagreements that would just hang in the air until one of us got tired of it. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because then I got the call. It wasn't just any call. It was one of those calls where, the moment you hang up, you have to sit down and process what just happened because your brain can't immediately make sense of it. It was the kind of conversation that leaves you staring at the floor, your heart pounding, a lump forming in your throat, not out of sadness, but out of pure, dumbfounded disbelief. Her mother was the one who called. At first, she sounded calm, polite even, which honestly threw me off because I had no idea what was coming. But then, as if she had just been waiting for the right moment to strike, she got straight to the point. My father and I believe that you should include Amber in the agreement. That was how she phrased it, like it was the most logical and inevitable thing in the world, as if this was some kind of legal discussion and not a deeply personal decision that should have been between me and my girlfriend. I was still trying to wrap my head around that sentence when she hit me with the next part. You are a guy, you have to pay all the expenses yourself, it is your responsibility as a man. And suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just about Amber wanting security. This wasn't about a fair discussion or even a difference in opinion. This was something deeper. This was about their beliefs, their old school, borderline archaic idea of what a relationship should look like. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. There was no way she actually just said that. No way she had just unironically told me that because I was a man, should be solely responsible for the financial burden of this house while her daughter, an adult woman, had the right to claim half of it without contributing a cent. But before I could even formulate a response, before I could even begin to ask what the hell she was talking about, her father chimed in. She should still have the right to the house. It is her choice, and it is your responsibility to provide for her future. I could feel my grip tightening around my phone. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I had expected them to be involved in this situation to some degree. I mean, they had already influenced Amber enough to turn a non-issue into a full-blown argument, but this? This was something else entirely. This wasn't just overstepping. This was outright demanding that I hand over half of a house I hadn't even bought yet, all because their daughter had the right to security, regardless of whether she contributed to it or not. I started explaining. Not angrily, not yet, because I was still trying to be reasonable, still trying to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they just didn't understand the full picture. I told them that this was my house, that my parents were the ones putting money into the down payment, that Amber wasn't contributing financially. I told them that if we got married, things could be discussed differently, but right now, it just wasn't logical to put her on the deed. They didn't care. Her mother cut me off before I could even finish, her tone sharper now, more impatient, like I was a stubborn child refusing to do as I was told. You just don't understand what it means to be a real man. It's your duty. Update 2. I couldn't believe this was really happening. It felt like I had somehow fallen into some strange alternate reality, one where logic and fairness no longer existed, and I was the only person who could see how absurd everything had become. It was like standing in the middle of a crowded room, shouting at the top of my lungs, only for everyone around me to pretend they couldn't hear me. No matter how clearly I laid out the facts, no matter how plainly I explained the situation, it didn't matter. I was up against something bigger than just an argument. I was up against expectations, entitlement, and a deeply ingrained belief system that dictated that I, as a man, owed something that was never mine to give. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about control. About expectations that had been quietly forming beneath the surface of my relationship for years, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. I realized then that I had never actually been aware of just how differently we saw things, how vastly our values diverged when it came to responsibility, fairness, and what it meant to build a life together. And now, faced with the stark reality of it, I felt like I was suffocating. It wasn't a rational conversation anymore. It was a demand, a claim being staked on something she had no right to. And the worst part was, I was being treated like I was the one who was out of line for refusing to comply. After that conversation with Amber's parents, I sat there for a long time, just trying to process everything. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed closer than they had before. My mind was racing, but my body felt frozen, like my brain was trying to work through a problem that had no real solution. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I had spent years believing that relationships were built on partnership, on mutual effort, on shared responsibility. But now I was being told, by two people who had no real stake in my life, that I owed their daughter something she hadn't earned. That I, simply by virtue of being a man, had to take on the full financial burden while she had the right to claim ownership of something she wasn't contributing to. It wasn't just insulting. It was terrifying. Because if this was how she and her family saw things now, what would stop this mindset from extending into every other aspect of our lives? If I gave in to this, what else would be expected of me? Would my earnings always be considered our money while hers, if she ever held a job long enough to make any, remained hers alone? Would every financial decision be twisted into a measure of my love, my devotion, my willingness to prove myself in ways that would always leave me carrying the full burden? I had to talk to Amber. I needed to believe that this wasn't actually how she saw things, that this was just her parents getting into her head, feeding her ideas that weren't truly her own. I needed to believe that she would at least try to see my point of view, that she would understand that this wasn't about excluding her but about making a responsible decision based on actual financial reality. I thought that if I just explained everything clearly, if I reminded her that this was about responsibility and not about trust, she would understand. She had to understand. But the moment I brought it up, I realized how wrong I was. She wasn't just on board with what her parents had said, she was entirely on board with it. There wasn't even a flicker of doubt, no hesitation, no moment where she stopped to consider what I was saying. She looked me straight in the eye, unwavering, and said it wasn't fair that she would be living in a house that didn't belong to her. That if we were together, we had to share everything. That she deserved to be on the deed, regardless of who was paying for what. It was a statement, not a discussion. A decision had already been made, and it didn't matter that I had been left out of the process entirely. I tried to stay calm. I reminded her that this wasn't about excluding her or making her feel like she didn't belong. I told her that once we were married, we could reevaluate everything, but right now, it just wasn't financially responsible to put her name on a house she hadn't contributed to. I explained that my parents were involved, that their money was part of this, and that it wasn't just my decision to make. I painted a clear picture of what fairness actually looked like. I told her that if the roles were reversed, if she were the one buying a house with her parents' help while I contributed nothing financially, I wouldn't expect to be put on the deed. That's not how ownership works. That's not how fairness works. She wouldn't hear it. She just kept repeating the same thing over and over again, like a broken record, her voice steady and unmoved by any logic I tried to present. It's not fair. We have to share everything. If we're together, we should both have security. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter that I was approaching this from a rational, reasonable place. She had already made up her mind. And she wasn't budging. And then she said something that absolutely shattered me. If you love me, you have to prove it. If you refuse to include me in the contract, then you don't want a future with me. I felt my stomach drop. That was it. That was the moment I realized what was actually happening. This wasn't just a disagreement. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ultimatum. A test. A manipulation so blatant that it should have made me walk away immediately, but instead, all I felt was this crushing weight in my chest, this deep sadness that the person I had spent years with, the person I had imagined a future with, would put me in this position. She wasn't asking for security. She wasn't asking for fairness. She was demanding proof of my love in the form of something tangible, something legal, something irreversible. She was saying that if I didn't give her exactly what she wanted, then I didn't care about her. That I wasn't serious about us. That I was the one being unreasonable. This was real emotional manipulation, and I understood it, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. Update 3. I resisted until the last moment. I told myself that if I just stood my ground, if I just continued to reason with Amber, with her parents, with anyone who had turned this into a battle instead of a simple life decision, they would eventually see how unreasonable they were being. I clung to that hope, even as the pressure mounted, even as the situation spiraled into something far uglier than I had ever imagined. At first, I thought I was dealing with a misunderstanding, something that could be talked through with patience and logic. But logic had no place in this conversation anymore. It had transformed into something else entirely, something toxic, something that made me feel like I was trapped in a never-ending negotiation where the only acceptable answer was the one they wanted to hear. The calls from her parents became relentless. At first, they disguised their demands in thinly veiled suggestions, acting as though they were only looking out for their daughter's best interest. They tried to frame it as concern, as though they were simply offering advice, as if this wasn't an obvious attempt at forcing my hand. Then the messages started coming in, passive-aggressive at first, then increasingly direct, each one chipping away at my patience. They told me that I wasn't a real man if I refused to provide Amber with stability, that I was selfish, that I was stringing her along without any real intention of building a life together. They treated me like an ungrateful outsider who didn't understand what it meant to love and commit, as if love could only be proven by handing over half of something that didn't belong to her in the first place. It didn't matter that Amber wasn't contributing financially, that my parents had a stake in this, that I was the one shouldering the responsibility. To them, those details were irrelevant. All that mattered was that I was supposed to give, and she was supposed to receive. The more I resisted, the worse it got. The calls became more frequent, the tone more hostile. They didn't even bother hiding their disdain for me anymore. They spoke to me like I was some kind of failure, like I was a disappointment of a man who had dared to deny their daughter something she was owed by default. They made it clear that I would never be good enough, that I was proving it with every passing day that I refused to comply. There was no discussion to be had anymore, only ultimatums, only expectations that I was meant to meet whether I wanted to or not. Amber started acting differently. At first, it was subtle, longer silences, a distant look in her eyes when we were together, the feeling that she was somewhere else even when she was physically in the same room. Then it became undeniable. She was cold, detached, barely acknowledging me unless it was to bring up the house again. The person who used to curl up next to me on the couch, who used to reach for my hand absent-mindedly while we were watching a movie, who used to laugh at stupid inside jokes, was gone. She spent more time on her phone than she did actually talking to me, and I didn't need to ask who she was texting. It was obvious. Her parents. Her friends. Whoever was fueling this idea that I was failing her, that I was the villain in this situation, that I was the unreasonable one. I would walk into a room, and she would abruptly end a call or lower her voice, not even bothering to hide the fact that she was discussing me like I wasn't even there. I started feeling like I was living with a stranger. She barely made eye contact with me, barely acknowledged my presence unless it was to throw another cold remark my way. She was withdrawing, but not in the way that signaled sadness or hurt, in the way that signaled punishment. She wanted me to feel it. She wanted me to feel guilty, to feel like I was the one ruining things, like I was the one making a mistake. It wasn't just disappointment, it was calculated. Every time I tried to have a normal conversation, she was distant, distracted. Every time I brought up anything other than the house, she barely responded. It was like she had shut down completely, like nothing mattered anymore except this one demand she refused to let go of. And I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about winning. The air in our apartment became suffocating. It wasn't just tension, it was something heavier, something poisonous that seeped into every moment we spent together. There was no laughter anymore, no shared moments of comfort, no warmth. I wasn't her boyfriend anymore, I was just the obstacle standing between her and what she believed she deserved. Every conversation felt like a test, every interaction a reminder that I was failing to meet expectations I had never agreed to in the first place. She didn't want to compromise. She didn't want to hear my side. She wanted me to submit. And that was when it finally hit me, this wasn't about love. It wasn't even about trust. This was about control. This was about winning. This was a power game, and I was expected to lose. But I wasn't going to. So I made my choice. I told Amber that I was withdrawing my offer for us to live together. I told her that I couldn't buy a house under these conditions, not when I was being pressured, manipulated, and backed into a corner. I told her that a decision as big as home ownership should be made out of excitement and mutual agreement, not because I was being worn down by constant attacks. I had held on as long as I could, but I wasn't going to be forced into something that went against common sense. Amber exploded. Whatever composure she had been trying to maintain shattered instantly. She didn't try to reason with me. She didn't pause to ask if this was really what I wanted. She screamed. She accused me of betraying her, of being selfish, of leading her on for years only to abandon her the moment things got serious. She said I had never really loved her, that if I had, would have done whatever it took to make her feel secure, that I was choosing money over our relationship. The anger in her voice wasn't just from hurt, it was from losing. She had believed that with enough pressure, with enough guilt, I would cave. And now that I wasn't, now that I was walking away from the game entirely, she didn't know how to handle it. But I had already made up my mind.